The horizon over the Gulf of Oman split open at exactly 5:43 in the morning. A flash of light tore across the sea, followed by a roar that rattled steel hulls and shook command centers hundreds of miles away. It was not an accident. It was not a drill. Iran had just fired the first of its precision strike cruise missiles in a spectacle designed to stun the world. For a moment, silence followed, then came the shockwave of realization. This was not just a test, it was a message. A challenge hurled across the waters, where American carriers and Allied fleets maintained freedom of navigation. What hidden plan lies behind this sudden display of power? Was this an exercise, or the rehearsal for a war nobody wants but everyone fears? Do not just watch history unfold. Join the mission. Like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts now. By sunrise on August 21st, the entire northern Indian Ocean had become a chessboard of military power. Iranian warships cut across the waves, submarines slipped beneath the surface, and radar stations lit up the skies. Overhead, drones and surveillance aircraft mapped every movement. But it was the missiles, the short, medium, and long-range weapons that carried the true weight of Iran's message. Israel monitored the drills with satellites, while American destroyers in the region quietly shifted positions, their Aegis systems locked in silent readiness. One wrong signal, one misunderstood launch, could ignite a war stretching far beyond the Gulf of Oman. Do you believe this was deterrence or a rehearsal for something far more dangerous? At exactly 7:15 in the morning, the first wave of Iranian missiles streaked into the sky above the Gulf of Oman. Their exhaust plumes left white scars against the blue, each one carrying a payload engineered to prove that Iran's military was not a paper tiger but a force ready for confrontation. Rear Admiral Abbas Hassani had promised precision and power, and now the world was watching to see if those words would materialize into reality. Phase 1. The opening salvo. The missiles did not aim for distant cities or civilian infrastructure. Their targets were mock warships positioned across the water's hulks, deliberately placed to simulate American destroyers and Israeli corvettes. At 7:17, the first impact tore through a steel platform, sending a column of fire into the air. Iranian state television replayed the explosion in slow motion, broadcasting the message that their weapons could shatter hardened naval defenses. Within minutes, radar screens in U.S. Central Command headquarters lit up. Analysts recognized the launches not as random tests, but as carefully coordinated firings at staggered intervals, exactly the kind of sequencing used in real combat to overwhelm missile defenses. The United States Navy's Aegis systems were designed to intercept waves of incoming threats, but the Iranian drill seemed choreographed to probe those very capabilities. Was this coincidence or a deliberate signal? Phase 2. Submarine shadows. At 7:43, Iranian submarines surfaced briefly before slipping beneath the waves again. Their role was not symbolic. These diesel-electric boats carried anti-ship cruise missiles, designed to fire from hidden depths and strike at vessels far beyond the horizon. One submarine, the Fateh-class, released a missile that skimmed just meters above the sea before detonating against another decoy vessel. The plume of water surged 50 feet into the air, a spectacle impossible to ignore. American P-8 Poseidon patrol aircraft circling the area detected the launch instantly. Radio chatter between U.S. destroyers confirmed that every submarine track was being marked, every acoustic signal recorded. Yet, no American ship fired. The rules of engagement remained strict. Monitor, record, deter, but do not escalate. For every Iranian move, an invisible American countermove was already underway. Phase 3. Air and electronic warfare. By 8:22, Iranian fighter jets roared over the drills, dropping flares and releasing precision-guided munitions against coastal targets. Behind the spectacle, radar interference began sweeping across the frequencies used by Allied surveillance systems. Iranian crews activated mobile electronic warfare units, attempting to jam signals and blind foreign satellites. For Israeli commanders watching from Tel Aviv, the implication was clear. Iran was rehearsing not just missile launches but the layered warfare of the 21st century, combining missile fire, submarine strikes, and electronic disruption into a single, synchronized doctrine. In modern war, jamming communications can be as deadly as a missile strike, and Iran wanted the world to know it could fight on every front. American officials understood the message as well. Within hours, the U.S. Navy deployed additional EA-18 Graham Growler electronic warfare aircraft from a carrier group farther south, ensuring that Allied forces could neutralize Iranian jammers if conflict erupted. It was a silent duel of invisible weapons signals against counter-signals, deception against detection, political echoes. By midday, state television in Tehran was celebrating the success of the exercise. Commentators declared that Iranian missiles could now strike any hostile ship that dared enter the Gulf of Oman. Meanwhile, Israeli outlets warned that the drills were nothing less than a rehearsal for the next war. News anchors pointed out that just 2 months earlier, on June 13th, Israeli airstrikes had ignited a 12-day conflict with Iran, drawing in American forces by June 22nd. That clash had ended only when President Donald Trump declared a ceasefire on June 24th. Yet here, barely 8 weeks later, Iran was firing missiles into the same waters where American ships still patrolled. For Washington, the challenge was as much political as military. Could the United States allow Iran to project such confidence without response? And if America did respond, would that very act trigger the war both sides insisted they wanted to avoid? Tactical lessons. Military analysts noted key details of the drills. Missile sequencing. Iran launched short-range, medium-range, and long-range missiles in overlapping waves, a tactic designed to saturate defenses. Submarine integration. The use of Fateh-class submarines underscored Iran's ambition to strike stealthily from beneath the sea. Electronic warfare. Attempts to jam and blind surveillance systems highlighted a new priority: fighting in the electromagnetic spectrum. Command coordination. The synchronization between sea, air, and electronic units revealed a level of planning far beyond routine training. Each element suggested Iran was preparing for more than symbolism. They were practicing the doctrine of modern naval warfare. Reactions abroad. At 9:40, Japanese news outlets carried images of smoke columns rising from the Gulf, framing the exercise as proof of regional instability. Chinese commentators seized on the drills to argue that American power was overstretched, pointing to the fire aboard the USS New Orleans just days earlier as evidence that U.S. naval dominance was aging and fragile. But American admirals were far from complacent. By 10:15, additional destroyers shifted closer to choke points in the Strait of Hormuz, their missile tubes loaded and radar arrays sweeping the skies. NATO allies were briefed, and British frigates in the region adjusted their patrol patterns to ensure rapid response capability. The message from Washington was quiet but firm. Deterrence remains intact. The United States Navy was not retreating, it was preparing. The unspoken fear. Behind every maneuver lay a hidden question. What if one of those test missiles strayed off course? What if an American drone was accidentally struck? What if an Iranian submarine, emboldened by drills, shadowed too close to a U.S. destroyer? History has shown that wars often begin not with deliberate decisions, but with accidents, miscalculations, or a single spark in volatile waters. At 11:36, one missile veered slightly off its programmed path before self-destructing mid-air. The error triggered alarms in Allied command centers. For a few tense seconds, officers wondered if the weapon had targeted an actual vessel. Relief came only when radar confirmed the explosion was part of a fail-safe mechanism. Still, the moment revealed how close the region sat to the edge of war, building the suspense. Every move, every launch, every radar lock, every intercepted signal was a reminder that the Gulf of Oman was no longer just water. It was a stage where nations rehearsed survival, where the line between exercise and escalation grew thinner by the hour. And as the second day of drills approached, one thought haunted American, Israeli, and even European commanders alike. What if this was not the end of the story, but the opening chapter of a far greater confrontation? So we must ask, was Iran simply demonstrating deterrence, or laying the groundwork for a strike that could redraw the entire balance of the Middle East? If you are following this untold story, share your thoughts in the comments. Was this drill a show of strength or a rehearsal for the war of tomorrow? Subscribe now, because the next move may come without warning. Dawn broke on August 22nd, with a sky painted in shades of crimson and steel gray. It was the second day of Iran's missile drills in the Gulf of Oman, and tension in the region had only intensified. American satellites had tracked the previous day's launches, but the intelligence brief for this morning carried a phrase that sent a chill through the Pentagon: full-spectrum integration expected. In other words, Iran was preparing to combine every tool at its disposal, sea, air, land, cyber, and electronic, into a single demonstration of power. The rising storm. At precisely 6:07 in the morning, 3 Iranian missile batteries along the coast near Jask simultaneously lit up. The launches were synchronized, arcing toward different sectors of the sea. One targeted a barge resembling an aircraft carrier deck, another a floating platform mimicking a missile cruiser, and the third a shock to observers and anchored mock-up designed to look like an American littoral combat ship. The symbolism was impossible to miss. Within minutes, the mock targets were engulfed in flames. Iranian state media repeated the phrase, "Strike any vessel, anywhere, anytime." For commanders aboard U.S. destroyers stationed near Bahrain, the drills were no longer just noise in the background. They had become a direct rehearsal of strikes against American ship classes. The submarine hunt. At 7:21, Iranian submarines once again slipped beneath the waves. This time, however, American sonar operators detected unusual acoustic signatures patterns, suggesting that the submarines were coordinating in pairs, one trailing behind the other. Analysts recognized the tactic immediately: wolf pack hunting, a method designed to confuse anti-submarine defenses and strike from multiple angles. American P-8 Poseidon aircraft dropped sonobuoys in a rapid pattern, creating an invisible curtain of listening devices. For 2 hours, the hunt unfolded silently beneath the waves. No torpedoes were fired, no missiles launched. Yet the tension was unbearable, as both sides knew how little margin for error existed. What if a U.S. submarine crossed paths with an Iranian boat in a narrow strait? What if one captain misread a sonar ping as a threat? By 9:46, the Iranian subs resurfaced briefly, firing salvos at decoy targets before vanishing again. The point had been made. Iran could prowl beneath the seas just as confidently as it could strike above them. The cyber front opens. At 10:29, another layer of the exercise came into play. Iranian state media announced that their cyber units were conducting electronic disruptions against simulated enemy networks. Almost immediately, American defense contractors reported unusual probes on their systems, digital fingerprints traced back to servers in the region. These were not destructive attacks, but reconnaissance missions, the kind of intrusions that precede real operations. The overlap between missile launches at sea and cyber probes on land was no coincidence. It was a textbook demonstration of hybrid warfare, where the battlefield is not only physical but digital. Could a barrage of cyber attacks cripple command systems at the same time missiles streaked across the horizon? The exercise seemed designed to make the world ask that very question. The Allied response. Meanwhile, the United States and Israel were not idle observers. At 11:12, American destroyers in the region raised their readiness status. Aegis combat systems were primed, standard missile interceptors locked into firing positions, and crews drilled in intercept simulations. Israeli aero missile defense batteries went on heightened alert, even though they were hundreds of miles away. In London, the British Ministry of Defense issued a statement affirming support for American operations in the Gulf. A Royal Navy frigate patrolling the Arabian Sea adjusted its patrol route to cover potential choke points. NATO may not have been directly involved, but the alliance's cohesion was clear. An attack on one Western vessel would spark a chain reaction no one in Tehran could ignore. Psychological warfare.
To be here.
Iranian officials, however, seemed determined to project confidence. At 12:49, Rear Admiral Abbas Hassani declared that any hostile presence in the Gulf will meet with overwhelming force. The words were calculated to stir domestic pride, but also to test the nerves of Washington and Tel Aviv. Could the West maintain its composure while Iranian commanders spoke so boldly? American commanders responded not with speeches but with maneuvers. At 1:16 in the afternoon, a carrier strike group moved closer to the Gulf of Oman. F-35 Lightning II jets lifted off in combat patrol formation, sending a visual reminder that American power projection was not theoretical, it was airborne, immediate, and overwhelming. A dangerous close call. The most dangerous moment of the day came at 2:52 in the afternoon. An Iranian missile programmed to strike a dummy vessel suddenly altered course after launch. Its guidance system malfunctioned, causing it to veer toward open waters where American ships were patrolling. Within seconds, U.S. destroyers detected the rogue trajectory. A Standard Missile-2 interceptor was armed, and commanders prepared to fire. Then, at the last possible moment, the Iranian missile self-destructed mid-air, its debris raining harmlessly into the sea. Relief swept through command centers, but the close call underscored the fragility of the situation. Had the missile continued its path for another 30 seconds, the United States would have been forced to intercept and escalation would have been unavoidable. Media battles. By the evening hours, the drills had become a propaganda war. Iranian outlets called the exercise a warning to aggressors. Israeli commentators described it as a rehearsal for the next clash. American analysts, speaking cautiously, emphasized deterrence but noted the risk of accidental escalation. CNN broadcast a split-screen image. Iranian missiles firing on one side, U.S. warships preparing on the other. The message to viewers was simple. Two powers were locked in a dance on the edge of conflict. The smallest misstep could send both tumbling into war. The underlying question. By 9:30 at night, the second day of drills drew to a close. Iranian officials declared the exercise a success. Fireworks lit up Tehran, celebrating what state media called a new era of deterrence. But for American and Israeli planners, the question remained, was this truly the end of a drill or the beginning of a new campaign to challenge Western presence in the Middle East? Because every launch, every maneuver, and every digital probe carried with it a hidden truth. Deterrence is a razor's edge, and Iran was walking it with deliberate confidence. So ask yourself, do these exercises strengthen stability through deterrence, or do they only push the region closer to chaos? If this story grips you, leave your thoughts in the comments. Do not just watch, be part of the conversation. Subscribe now to stay with us as we uncover the twists still hidden in the shadows. The official conclusion of Iran's drills was declared at 10:02 in the evening of August 22nd. Fireworks crackled over Tehran, and state media praised the Navy, the Air Force, and the cyber units for defending the sovereignty of the Islamic Republic. But as Western analysts began drafting their after-action reports, a development occurred that no one had anticipated: the unexpected activation. At 10:36, American satellites orbiting over the Gulf detected a surge of infrared signatures from inland Iran deep in the desert near Kerman province. The thermal spike indicated the ignition of engines from a type of missile not previously disclosed during the exercise. Within minutes, analysts identified it, a long-range cruise missile with a reach far beyond the Gulf of Oman. It was not part of the scheduled drill. It was something hidden. The missile did not aim toward U.S. or Israeli assets. Instead, it flew in a test trajectory into the desolate expanse of the Indian Ocean, detonating over open waters. But the message was unmistakable. Iran had kept a card concealed until the final act, revealing that its arsenal was larger,
A-10s
deeper,
are
and
simple,
more sophisticated than
effective, and
anyone had
survivable
confirmed
twin-engine
publicly.
jet aircraft
The
that
reaction.
can be used. A-10s
Inside the
are simple,
Pentagon, the twist
effective,
triggered
and
urgent
survivable
consultations.
twin-engine jet aircraft
Was this
that
a
can be
simple
used.
demonstration? Or had Iran deliberately staged the entire two-day drill as a cover for unveiling a secret weapons system? The hidden launch suggested a strategy of deception, lull the world into focusing on surface drills, submarines, and electronic warfare, then unveil a capability that could strike targets 2,000 kilometers away. Israel's response was immediate. At 11:05, Israeli satellites confirmed the launch point, and senior defense officials called it a grave provocation. The fear was not just the missile itself, but what it symbolized: Iran's ability to conceal strategic weapons until the moment of revelation. How many more hidden systems remain buried in underground silos or disguised as civilian infrastructure? The cyber ripple. As if on cue, Western intelligence networks reported unusual cyber activity emanating from servers linked to Iranian defense industries. The pattern suggested that the hidden missile test had been accompanied by a probing of satellite command channels. Was this coincidence? Or was Iran testing whether its secret launches could be masked from digital surveillance? The possibility chilled American and NATO planners alike. The real twist. Yet the most shocking element was not the missile itself. At 11:50, intercepted Iranian communications revealed that the test was codenamed Message to the Eagle. Analysts interpreted the codename as a direct warning to the United States. It was not simply a domestic display. It was a calculated declaration that Iran's deterrence extended far beyond the Gulf, reaching into the wider Indo-Pacific where American forces operated freely. The unanswered question. The world now faced a haunting question. If Iran could reveal one hidden system in the final hour of a drill, what else lay in reserve? Could there be swarms of drones, hypersonic prototypes, or even undisclosed partnerships supplying advanced technology? For U.S. commanders, the lesson was clear. Never assume that the exercise is over when the fireworks begin. What do you think? Was this final launch mere theater, or the unveiling of a strategic ace? Comment below and subscribe to stay with us as we break down the consequences of this hidden twist. The hidden missile test changed everything. What had begun as a two-day demonstration of deterrence in the Gulf of Oman now carried strategic consequences reaching far beyond the Middle East. For the United States and its NATO allies, the launch was not just about a single missile. It was about credibility. Washington had promised its partners in the region that Iranian power would be contained, that freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz would be secured, and that no rogue state could threaten the balance of global trade. Iran's secret revelation challenged all three assurances at once. Strategically, the launch underscored three truths. Deception as doctrine. Iran had proven it could mask capabilities until the very last moment. Western intelligence, though vast, had been caught off guard. That meant any future confrontation could include weapons that American and Israeli planners had not accounted for. Deterrence beyond the Gulf. A missile capable of reaching 2,000 kilometers changed the map of potential conflict. U.S. bases in Qatar, Bahrain, and Diego Garcia now lay within striking range. Even naval task forces operating deep in the Indian Ocean could no longer assume immunity. Escalation risks. By combining missile drills, submarine maneuvers, electronic warfare, and cyber probes, Iran revealed a layered doctrine intended to paralyze an enemy across multiple domains. Such complexity raised the risk of miscalculation. A missile gone astray, a submarine too close, or a cyber intrusion misread as sabotage could ignite a conflict no one truly wanted. Yet the consequences went beyond tactics. Politically, Israel felt vindicated in its warnings that Iran was preparing for the next war. Arab Gulf states grew more anxious, quietly pressing Washington for guarantees of protection. Inside NATO, the hidden launch reignited debates about how far the alliance should extend its posture eastward to deter Iran alongside the growing challenge of China. The United States, however, found opportunity in crisis. By showcasing restraint monitoring without escalating, Washington demonstrated discipline and maturity. The message was subtle but powerful. America is not only a military superpower, it is a stabilizing force. NATO's deterrence doctrine held firm, reminding allies and adversaries alike that strength is not just measured in missiles fired, but in crises endured without losing control. Do you agree that the real test of power is restraint, not reaction? Comment your thoughts below. And remember, your voice helps shape this community. The echoes of Iran's drills in the Gulf of Oman will fade from the news cycle, but the lessons remain etched into the fabric of modern conflict. Behind every missile launch, every submerged submarine, and every cyber probe lies a universal truth. The 21st century battlefield is no longer a single domain. It is everywhere, all at once. For Iran, the exercise was a declaration of survival, a show of strength intended to deter adversaries and reassure its own people. But for the United States and NATO, it became something greater, a reminder that deterrence is not passive. It requires vigilance, adaptation, and the courage to remain steady under provocation. The hidden missile test revealed more than hardware. It revealed the mindset of a nation determined to play the long game, weaving deception into doctrine and mixing politics with firepower. But it also revealed something else, the resilience of those who guard the seas. American destroyers, Israeli radars, and NATO frigates all stood their watch without firing a single shot. That is the essence of strength, the ability to prepare for war, yet preserve peace. History tells us that wars often begin not with bold declarations, but with accidents. A missile that veers off course, a radar signal misread, a submarine too close to the line. That is why deterrence matters. It is not about crushing an enemy. It is about preventing the first spark. In the Gulf of Oman, that spark was nearly lit. And yet, restraint prevailed. So what should we take from this untold story? The technology will continue to evolve, alliances will continue to shift, and adversaries will continue to test boundaries. But peace fragile, hard-won peace demands constant vigilance. Strength deters chaos. As citizens, as observers, and as guardians of history, we must pay attention. We must demand wisdom from our leaders, resilience from our institutions, and readiness from our defenders. Because the price of complacency is always greater than the price of preparation. And so, the Gulf of Oman becomes more than a headline. It becomes a classroom. A reminder that the balance of power is delicate, that deterrence is essential, and that peace demands power not as a weapon of conquest, but as a shield against the storm. Do you believe peace can only be preserved through strength? Share your view in the comments. Subscribe now, because tomorrow's story will not wait, and history is being written in real time.